So I received a message from a good friend of mine who told me they had a neighbor who had a lawnmower they wanted to get rid of. And to my surprise, it was a decent one too, which is not a requirement, but it's always nice to find stuff that'll easily sell in the market. Now we just have to make sure it'll start and run and works the way that it should. Otherwise, this neighbor's gift might be good for only one thing: parts. In today's video, we're going to be looking at this Troy-Bilt branded lawnmower. And the problem is that we just picked it up and we have no idea on its condition, but more than likely, it's not going to start. Now don't blame the engine if it doesn't start. Engines don't like to be left unused unless it's repaired, which doesn't happen all too often. But before we start on this project, it's best to record all the information we can about it, just in case we need to order parts for it. Now the first thing we need to do is take a look around the machine and see if we can find anything that might be a problem, and it doesn't take long to find one. This cable is not broken. However, it's not only frozen, but it's also the wrong one because it's several inches too long. We can only guess the last person ordered this part by description alone instead of using the information from the stickers. But for us to be able to test it, we'll have to use a rope to bypass the brake and allow the ignition system to work. I'm also going to take this opportunity to inspect the condition of the blade and the mowing deck. And to my surprise, the mowing deck is in great condition. Not only that, but the blade is in fair condition too. It could use a good sharpening, but we'll worry about that later on. Now there is a large amount of dirt collecting around the governor shaft, which is not a good sign, as it could mean there's an oil leak there. Now there is some good news though, and that is there's still some gasoline in the fuel tank, although who knows how old it might be. Unfortunately, after opening the fuel cap, it released the rope by passing the brake, so we'll have to set it up again. We still want to be able to shut down the engine in a hurry, so that's why I'm not making this permanent. Of course, we do plan on trying to start this engine, but we need to make sure there's plenty of oil in it, otherwise we risk damaging it. And as you can see, there is more than enough oil in it, but it is quite dirty, so an oil change will be needed later on once we get it working like it should be. Now because the brake system is bypassed, we shouldn't be able to use the choke lever, but for some reason it's holding position, which is not right. Normally, while the brake is in this position, the choke lever is supposed to slowly release, so we'll need to inspect it if we take the carb off the engine. And just like we thought, it didn't start, at least with the gasoline that was still in the fuel tank. Next, we'll try that again, except this time we'll put some of our own fuel into the carb. Now that we know the engine can't start and run, it might be the gasoline in the fuel tank that's keeping it from starting. However, when trying to drain the fuel from the tank, come to find out there really wasn't that much in there. So instead, we'll have to drain it from a different location, and I think right after the fuel valve might be a good spot. We could have also done this by loosening the bolt that holds the fuel bowl to the carb, but I'll leave that up to you. But if you do choose to do it this way, just make sure not to damage the fuel valve since it is just made out of plastic. Now because the fuel level is quite low in the fuel tank, I don't expect to get much out of it. And to be quite honest, I wish I would have just drained the fuel from the bowl instead, because that's what we're going to end up doing anyway. And after draining all that we could from the fuel tank, this is what came out of it. So this gasoline is definitely not fresh, but I think it's still quite usable, especially after using our own fuel to get the engine started. That means the carb is the most likely problem, and specifically the main fuel jet might be clogged. And to get to the fuel jet, we'll just need to drop the fuel bowl, but to make this easier to film, I'm going to remove the front cover as well. Now you don't have to do this to get access to the carb, but I'm planning on taking a shortcut which some of you have already witnessed in a different video. And the goal here is to get the engine running well enough to decide if we should continue with the project. That way, we don't end up investing good money in parts for a broken machine. And it's a good thing we did take this front cover off because there's a lot of grass clippings hiding under it. So if you have a cover like this one or something very similar, you might want to take it off and clean up the mess that might be under there. Now I wasn't prepared for the surprise, so I'll try to clean it the best I can and then move on to draining the fuel bowl. Just be very careful if you use compressed air to help clear this mess, because that mess can get to other places you don't want it to. So I do plan on capturing the fuel that was in the bowl just to make sure it wasn't different from what came out of the fuel tank. But if you don't plan on capturing it, put some rags under the carb, that way the gasoline won't damage the paint. Now from what I can tell so far, the fuel in the bowl is about the same, if not better, than what came out of the fuel tank. And once the fuel has stopped dripping from the bowl, we'll take off the bolt so we can remove the bowl. The bowl should be loose, but sometimes it'll be stuck and we'll need some persuasion to come loose. Just be very careful and try not to damage the bowl. Now this one just needed a small nudge for it to come loose. Now looking inside the bowl, we can see a small amount of fine particles that the screen wasn't able to capture. But these particles are so fine that they should be able to pass through the carb with no problems. And while we're here, we better make sure that the float is not stuck, because if it is, it won't be able to help regulate fuel flow through the carb. So here's a better view of the fuel that came out of the bowl, and it's pretty obvious now that this fuel is just as stale as what was in the fuel tank. So the shortcut I'm going to use is to clear the jet well enough to get the carb working and get the engine running. Now to do this, I'm going to use my cleaning wires, and all we need to do is push about 1 inch of the wire into the pickup tube. We'll then work the wire to help clean the opening in the jet, but I probably should have done this from the opposite direction too, and you'll see why later on. We'll then follow that up with a couple of shots of carb cleaner just for good measure, but sometimes this doesn't work well enough versus a full cleaning. Spray as much as you want, because I don't think you can do this too much. You can see that the cleaner even made it through the front side of the carb, which is a good sign. So at this point, the fuel jet should be clear enough to get the engine running again, and maybe, just maybe, work well enough that we don't have to take the carb off the engine. But if you're experienced with this carb, then it should be no problem whatsoever to do, but what if you're not? Then this shortcut might be what you need to get your mower back up and running. This method is ideal when it's your own personal mower that you're familiar with, but for us, it'll help to find out if this project is worth fixing. If the engine starts and runs, doesn't make any terrible sounds, and the self-propel works, then I don't have a problem buying all the parts we need for this project. But it would be very foolish to buy the cable, a tune-up kit, and a blade before ever knowing that it works. Before putting the fuel cap back onto the fuel tank, take a look at the tiny openings around the edge. These openings are part of the air vent system for the cap, and if they're clogged with dirt, then the vent won't work like it should, and the engine will stop running after a few minutes. So I would recommend blowing out these openings with either compressed air or even using brake cleaner. There are other ways to clean them, and the 2 ways I mentioned are not the only ways. After putting fuel into the tank, check and make sure that the carb is not leaking any fuel, and if it is, you'll have to fix it before trying to start the engine. I'm also going to redo my rope bypass using a pair of vice grips, that way we can quickly release it just in case things go wrong. Now hopefully we won't need to, but you can never tell until it's too late. Well, that went about as well as could be expected for a shortcut of a fix, but at least we found out what we needed to know. So the engine didn't make any strange noises. Yes, it was surging because the carb needs a better cleaning, and the self-propel was also working and didn't make any strange noises either. That means I'm quite happy to order the cable this mower needs and any other parts as well. And besides replacing the air filter and doing an oil change along with some light maintenance to the blade and wheels, I think this will be an easy sale when the season starts back up. So what happened to this lawnmower, and how did it get here? Well, from what I'm seeing, I think the cable broke and they tried to replace it, but with the wrong one. They then decided they didn't want to risk getting the wrong part again, and then just let the mower sit until they were ready to give it away. And in that time, they had left fuel in the tank, which then led to a clog in the carb. Now you can leave fuel in the tank all year long, just so long as you use the mower periodically, but leaving the system idle is not a good idea. Now this happens way more often than anyone wants to admit, but just so long as it keeps happening, projects like this will keep showing up. So my question is, do you leave gasoline in your lawnmower for long periods of time? And if you do, have you ever had problems like on this lawnmower? Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.